champion becomes a legend. Mackay Deaver has won it. Perkins goes in first. What a legend. What a champion.
Welcome to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
As always, great to have you with us for another edition of This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. And today we celebrate the life of a man who played for 4 clubs in his decorated career, but he is a member of one of the most exclusive clubs in football. He is a Brownlow medalist for Melbourne. His name is Brian Wilson. He's in the studio. Brian, good to see you.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here.
It's been a while.
It has been a while, mate, since we caught up, actually. So,
yes.
No, it's good to come in and have a chat.
Yeah, many years ago, as it seems now, but you're looking well. Obviously, life's treating you pretty well.
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, very, very good. You know, I've kept the weight off, which is important, I guess, at my age, at 58, and... yeah, going well. Got a great, beautiful family and work's going exceptionally well. So I'm in a good space.
What is work? What do you do for a living?
Well, I've always been involved since I retired, actually, into branding. So licenses. So we took on the AFL licensing way back in the early 90s when it really didn't exist. And so I've always been involved in that. So I'm doing the similar things, in the Olympics and all that type of stuff and branching out and doing some consultancy in those areas. So I love it. It's taking a brand, doing an analytical review of the brand and see where it will fit in the marketplace, whether it fits in a retail sector or a promotional sector, and then putting a plan and documenting it and then, getting it out into the marketplace. It's been cool. I've been doing it a long time.
Is that purely here in Australia, Brian, or is it abroad as well?
Well, yeah, it was in Australia, and now I've branched out in the States as well. So we've got business partners over in America where we're launching a lot of promotional key things that we're going to put out in a very big market in the States, and these will be big brands.
You obviously spend a fair bit of time in the States. Do you enjoy doing that? It used to be, the old days used to be, well, you'd go over as an Australian, all you had to do was open your mouth and they'd fall in love with you because they love the accent. Are they still pretty heavily into the Aussies?
Oh, look, they are, absolutely. The world's shrunk a hell of a lot now. But, what I love going over there is, I was able to catch up with a couple of old, there's some really clever Australians that are doing very well in America now. And one of my old teammates was a guy called Darren Bennett, who I played with, and it was really funny. I was out with my partner, and we were talking to a young guy who we are now employed, and he was a punter, American young guy, and he came up to me and he sort of looked at me and said, "Oh, you look a bit small to be playing that Aussie rules game, and how did you do that? And who did you play for?" I said, "Look, I played with Melbourne," and he goes, one of my coaches, and this guy played NFL, the young kid. Was a guy called Darren Bennett, and I went, "Billy," and we went down the path for about 5 minutes, and he didn't believe me. He said, "There's no way." And I said, "Well, put him on the phone." So he rang him, and Darren answered the phone, and I actually said to the young fella Tanner, I said, "Just tell Billy that it's Freak on the phone." And he goes, "Oh, no, I can't do that." I said, "Go on, just do that from Australia," and because that was what my nickname was amongst the boys, and. Darren answered the phone and he just went crazy. And then we spoke for like half an hour. Yeah. And I hadn't seen or spoken for Darren for maybe 25, 30 years.
It speaks a lot, Brian, to the bond that exists between teammates in football, that you hadn't spoken to him for 25 years and all of a sudden you pick up where you left off half an hour. There's that incredible bond when you share something like footballers do.
Look, absolutely. I think, the unique sport we played, it was very tough. I mean, it's a fantastic game now, and I love what it is, and a lot of the brutality's gone out. But, I can remember starting in the late 70s, there was one umpire, and it was brutal. There was lots of paybacks and even ups. So the guys stayed really close to each other. Even if we, back then the Demons, when I was at Melbourne, we were struggling as a side, but we had the camaraderie. We'd all go out together, we'd drink together, and we'd look after each other's backs. And I think that bond is pretty unique in the sport of Australian rules football, and it exists today. And even to the level where, I may not see guys for 25, 30 years, but I catch up with an old teammate, and it's like yesterday. And that's really special. And for me, it was too. I mean, Melbourne was pretty fabulous club for me, being there 9 years, because I'd been at 3 clubs before I was 19 and played senior football at each one. So, I was a young kid that didn't have any belief in mates and friends and all that, because, I was always a fighter and fighting so hard to succeed in life. I didn't trust anybody. But then coming into Melbourne and having Ron Barassi as a mentor was amazing, who taught me a lot of the goal setting outside of football. And then getting hold of some of the great guys like Gary Baker and Peter Giles and those guys. They were fabulous guys that taught you about friendship.
What about footy-wise at home? Do you get to see much footy these days with the busy life that you're leading?
Well, I don't. And there's 2 reasons. One is I don't really like going to live games. Why
is that?
I get so frustrated. I'll sit there and it's like I go home and I feel like I've played a game, because the nervous energy and I look and go, oh, why didn't he do that? Why didn't he move? Because I look beyond the play, and I always have, because that was what my unique ability was to be able to see and perceive where the ball was going to go. So you need to look beyond the action and see upfield, or where the players are moving, what side of the game, the oval they're on, and why. And I look at it now and go, why doesn't he move to the left? Why hasn't he got his player on this side? So I get very frustrated. I watch crazy on the television because it's focused and you can only see right at the action, and I love that. And the other reason is I had 2 beautiful girls, so it didn't really take me to the footy very much when we were growing up. We would go to the netball and enjoy all that. But my youngest daughter, Tyler, she's a mad Melbourne supporter, and we went to a few games maybe 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, and loved it. So luckily, Melbourne invite me back quite often, and Tyler and I will go to the footy, and we actually have a great day. We have some good fun together.
Do you like the way the game's evolved? Because there are certain vast differences from when you played. Do you like everything about the game, or are there certain points that you don't like?
Look, there is. I swore to myself that I would never compare my era to the current era, because they're completely different eras and games, and the whole everything was thing. But I love today's football. I think as it stands now in 2019, about 18 months ago, it wasn't too flash. But today, it's fabulous. The players are unique athletes. Their ability, both left and right, is incredible. Their skill level, the way they're able to get a ball to their teammate with an opposition 2 metres away, you wouldn't even attempt that back in our day, because the risk was too great. Where they can drill balls, and I just think that the skill level and their discipline is incredible. I think the sad part is that they don't socially they can't go out into the world now, and to be able to enjoy their successes of a game, they just can't do it because of the way social media works, and the way that it's now everyone sees anything happening within minutes.
We'll talk more about the way you approached the game when you were playing a little bit later in the program. But when you were talking about the differences between your era and today, you look at a guy like Paddy Cripps. Now, he's 6'5". In your day, he would have been, he's the ruckman.
Absolutely. Well, my day was Jimmy Steins. Yeah. Part of my day. I mean, Jimmy came in halfway through my career, and he was the new wave ruckman. Now it's Cripps as the ruck rover.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's seriously, and these guys, their skill level, it's a credit to them to be 6'5" and be able to hold themselves the way they do is amazing. But they're professionals. They train. We trained. We used to train Tuesday, Thursday.
Yep.
And Monday was not compulsory. We used to go in and get ice, and we would drink or have a few sherbets on a Saturday, because it was always a Saturday, and then we'd always go to one of the players' barbecues on a Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look, I was a hard trainer. I used to train very, very hard myself. But when you look at that as an early to what it is today, I mean, there is just no comparison. I mean, these guys, it's a professional occupation, and they've got the assistants to be able to help them, to get over injuries, psychologically. It's amazing, and it's a real effort that has to go in for every club. And I think that the AFL have done a great job in being able to, grow the game to the level it's at. And we've got girls. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, and they've now got a pathway. They've now got something to aspire towards.
They have, and my daughter was a player. She used to, and I can remember when my wife came home and said, Tyler is going to play Aussie rules. I went, oh, no, please, no, we don't want that. I didn't say it, but I was thinking it. And then she played at school, and Tanya said to me, my wife, Tanya said, well, why don't you come down and have a look? So I went down, I sat in the car, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the way the girls were playing in regards to how hard they went in for the ball. Some of the skill level was really good, but they love what they were doing. And now that it's a national game for both sexes, I think it's awesome.
We're going to take a break now, Brian. As I mentioned, 4 clubs. I think most people identify you with Melbourne, but there were 3 others that we need to talk about in the journey of Brian Wilson, the Brownlow medalist. We'll do that when we come back on the other side of the break. This is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Welcome back to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
Hope you're enjoying the chat with the Brownlow medalist Brian Wilson on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Brian, turn back the clock. Tell us where the journey began. Where did you grow up?
Well, it grew up way back in a place in Kensington, actually. Mum and Dad were from the country, and there was 4 children, and they decided we were from a country town in Euroa and Longwood, and Mum decided with Dad that wanted to give the children an opportunity in the big smoke. So we came down to Melbourne. I can remember I think I was maybe 8 or 9, and we went out to Yarraville, and then we're waiting to apply to get a commission house. So they put us in flats, and incredibly, I can still remember, flat 244 Derby Street. And it was a horrific time for a young 9-year-old for 12, 18 months. But it was a time that certainly got me to be able to play football. I never touched a football at all until I was 10. And one of the guys there down on the Oval, I went down one day and they said, why don't you have a go? So I did and never looked back. And so that was Kensington. And then we were successful, Mum and Dad, to get a housing commission house, which was from the government out in Braybrook. So we all moved out into the concrete jungle, I used to call it. And I can remember where I was there, probably 11 or 12, and I hated it. I just felt that I was just the most foreign person. I don't know why I was put into this situation. So I had an incredible desire to succeed and to get out of where I was. My mum and dad were lovely people, and they went to every single game I ever played. They were incredible, but they didn't have any money. And for me, I was lucky that I was clever at school, and I was able to kick this piece of leather around. So very fortunate that I was at Braybrook and played with the great legendary Dougie Hawkins. So we played together. I'd catch up with Doug every second year, and I don't think we ever lost a grand final. We played 2 years under 11, under 13, under 15. We won them all. And then I can remember I was 15 and we won the premiership in the under 15s. And then the next week I played in the under 17s in the centre, and we won the premiership in the under 17s. And then the guys from Footscray came down and said, we'd love to have you come down to the Bulldogs. So I went down at 16. I went down at 15 and played in the reserves. I was doing my Form 3. And then the next year at 16, I decided that I needed to get my licence. And all my buddies in Braybrook those days used to drive with no licence, but I couldn't do that. I had to obey by the law. So I flew over to my uncle's place in Adelaide and stayed there for 2 weeks and told the people over there that instructors that I've got a baker's job in Adelaide, but I have to have my licence within 2 weeks. So I got it, flew home, and then I can remember that night I picked up Doug. Doug was 17, I was 16, picked him up, borrowed Dad's car, and we were going into Footscray, and I hadn't had it 20 minutes and ran into the back of a trailer in another car. So I went home and I was devastated to tell my dad, and he was cool. He said, look, that's okay. It's a lesson learned. And that was my journey. So I was able to play that year in the seniors at Footscray in 1978. I played four games. and it was pretty cool, to go to Braybrook High School, of which I loved my schooling. So there wasn't too many people that did their Year 12 or HSC. It was back then in Braybrook, but I was fortunate enough that I met a couple of guys that were good study, and we used to do that. So I passed my HSC, and then the next year at 17, played 7 games, I think, in the seniors, and came runner-up in the Morris Medal, which is the reserves medal. And then a gentleman by the name of Royce Hart came in, and he decided that everyone was going to start again. So he met with me, and basically I was doing my Year 12, the HSC, and said, look, go and do your Year 12, do your study, come back in December, and we'll see how you go. So I put on a hell of a lot of weight because I was studying and eating, and I came back and I was very, very overweight. And he basically said, look, we used to have to do 7 laps of Flemington Racecourse in 70 minutes. That was what you had to do, and if you didn't pass it, you weren't going to play. So I went away in December, and my mum and we joined Weight Watchers back then, and I lost like 23 pounds or whatever it was, kilos or something, in about 8 weeks. Went down to Port Campbell, and I trained every day, ran 10 miles a day in and out of Port Campbell, and lost all this weight. Came back ready to do the seven laps of Flemington, which I'd done 2 days before in like 64 minutes. I came to training, and Royce and everyone's going, my goodness, you look amazing. Join the group. You don't need to do the 7 laps. And I went, wow, this is pretty cool. So I did the training, and then the next night they called me up and they said, look, what we've decided is we want you to go back to the under-19s. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, I want to see your journey all the way through. This is Royce Hart. And I said, oh, my God, what do I do? So I said, okay, look, I'll train. But I don't think that I should play because I've played the firsts for 2 years in the seniors. So I went down to the training on the Monday night, and there was 40 guys in the room, all young kids. I was only young myself. And the coach, I'm not going to mention who he was, he stood up and he said, well, there's certain senior players in this room. If I've got anything to do with it, they're never going to play another game of senior football. So I waited, took my jumper off, handed it to the coach, and walked out. Went home crying with my dad. I just, what have I done? And I was a guy. I was a pretty tough, guy with and a strong head, and I was always confident. So I wasn't the perfect angel, but my dad rang Ron Joseph at North Melbourne, and Ron said, look, we'd love to have an interview. So I went over and had an interview with Barassi, and you've got to remember, like, I was a mad North Melbourne supporter. So Doug and myself were crazy North Melbourne, and we used to play our game of a Saturday morning, and we'd jump out in the car and drive to Arden Street, and we'd stand on the hill, and we would watch our beloved Kangaroos. And, Dougie's idol was with Keith Gregg, and Dougie's career, the first, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, Dougie wore the white ankle guards that Keithy Gregg did, because we used to stand on the hill together and say to ourselves, maybe one day we'll make it, maybe one day. And if we do, we're going to wear the same number. And we did in the end. He was number 7 and I was number 7. Yeah. So that was, fabulous times. And then, I went and saw Barassi, and he said, look, young fella, he said, you're not going to play senior football for at least maybe 1 or 2 years. He said, but you won't play under 19s. I said, Mr. Barassi, that's all I need. If you give me that opportunity, that's what I want. So, and I can remember today, I walked into the change room, and this was, I was number 28. I had number 29, Snake Baker. I had number 27, Keith Gregg. Then there was Wayne Schimmelbusch. There was Xavier Tanner in the centre. These are all my heroes. Ross Glendenning, Ross Henshaw. These were superstars. And I played, they put me on a halfback flank for the second practice match, and I kicked 4 goals. And they said, well, maybe we need to put him back in the centre and maybe up forward. So,
how did the journey then evolve? What happened at North Melbourne that took you to Melbourne?
And the other superstar that I didn't mention is Malcolm Blight. So he was our idol. So Blight is a coach. Okay, so we're there first year at Melbourne. Brass is at North Melbourne. Brass is a coach. So he leaves at the end of 81. At the end of 1980, and Blighty comes in as a coach, and he was just, my God, this incredible superstar and a coach. The problem with Blighty was, at that time of his coaching career, he thought we were all as skillful and as good as he was. So what we didn't do is we didn't do a lot of training, because he didn't do a lot of training because he was that brilliant. And I think the first 7 or 8 games we won one. It was incredibly how it happened. So what happened is that he grabbed me and we went to the Black Prince in North Melbourne for lunch. Now, I committed myself that I was at university. I wasn't drinking, none of that. I wasn't into that sort of stuff. So we're sitting there and I was with my idol having a beer and he was the coach. So I'll never forget, it was Crown Lagers and I'd probably had 6. And he sat there and he said, he said, Brian, tell me what's going on. Tell me about what the players are. And I said, well, Blighty, we love you as a player. You're an amazing player, but we don't think you're a good coach. And that was the beginning of the end of Brian Wilson. And I can remember I was devastated, totally devastated. I remember ringing, I saw it back then, it was called the Sporting Globe. Remember the pink Sporting Globe?
I do.
So I was just about to go, it was December, to go up to Queensland with my mates. And in the Sporting Globe, there's a little article saying, North Melbourne Brian Wilson is going to be traded. And I rang Ron Joseph. I said, excuse me, Mr. Joseph, I've just read this article. Is it true? He goes, no. You go away, son. Go and enjoy your holiday in Queensland. Come back and you start training. So by the time I come back, I had a call from Barassi, and he said to me, how would you like to play for Melbourne? I said, Mr. Barassi, you can't do that. That's poaching. You'll get in trouble. He goes, I've got your contract signed, clearance. He said, you're a Melbourne player. And I was devastated. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So what I did is I went to Queensland with my buddies, and I don't think I ever ran so hard and so fast and every day, 10, 15 miles every day. I came back and I had to hate the world. So my goal was to get the ball as many times as I possibly can and to show the world and myself that I'd been at 3 clubs at 19, but I still could play. Because if I didn't, I'd be finished. And I played in the centre, and that year I had the most possessions in the league. I think I had the most marks in the league. And I won't say I'd push my own teammates out of the way, but I would fiercely get the ball and get it to my mate to prove to everybody that, hey, this young kid could play, and more so to get some pride back because I was pretty dinted. And I was very fortunate that at that time, the votes were mine, and I won the Brownlow. I got 7 threes and a 2, and I won it by 5 votes from Ross Glendenning, who was my idol. I'd won a Brownlow. I was a young 20-year-old, so I said to myself, well, how do I behave? What does a Brownlow medalist behave like? So instead of the jeans, I used to wear a suit, and Hertz Rent-A-Car. I was an ambassador at Hertz Rent-A-Car, and I decided that my time was going to be what I in my mind thought a Brownlow medalist was, which was all wrong. I got there through hard work and worked very, very hard, and I forgot about that for maybe a year or so. And probably people say, oh, what was your best year? But for me, it was probably 88, where I played on a half-forward flank and I had the most handballs, 3 times as many kicks, and I decided that I was going to really help them and be part of a team because of the amount of amazing young guys that weren't super talented, but we're all in it together. And that was something that I learned, to be a team player, and that you had to commit to your mates, because you go on that field, it's a war. And that was great to be able to forget about myself and then focus on why it is. It's called a team game.
Did you rock up to the Brownlow thinking that you might win it?
Oh wow, I've got another little story in that one. So there was 2 games to go, and I was 25-1. Okay, and we played in Crackers Keenan. God, I love Crackers. Yeah. He was the ruckman, and there was Jared Healy and Peter Giles and all those guys, and they grabbed me with 2 games to go, and they said, "You're a real chance to win the Brownlow." I said, "Oh, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? This is crazy." They said, "No. We've got the inside running. You're a real chance. You're 25-1." And they said, "We're going to put some money on you." I said, "No matter where you are in the last 2 games, we're going to get you the ball." And you can imagine Crackers is a ruckman. He was just the most amazing guy.
And didn't mind a punt every now and then.
And loved a punt. So basically what happened is in my last 2 games, I got a 2 and a 3, and I won by 5 votes. In my last game against the Sydney Swans at the MCG, at half-time I'd had maybe 8 possessions. At the second half, I had 21 because the guys were kicking it backwards, and we won the Brownlow. So I remember coming to that night, and I was so nervous. I'd come down from 25-1, backed right in, and I didn't have a drink all night. We drank orange juice because I swore to myself until I played 100 games I wasn't going to have a drink. And and it was at the old Southern Cross. And I was fortunate enough to get up and win.
A lot more to talk about in the career of Brian Wilson. We've touched on the Brownlow Medal. We'll talk about that time at Melbourne and then going on to the Saints afterwards when we come back on the other side of the break. Hope you're enjoying this edition of This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Welcome back to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
Brian Wilson is my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Brian, at the Melbourne Football Club, there was a real sense that a premiership could be just around the corner. 1987, 1988 was about that time where the premiership window was well and truly open. But that famous game in 87, had Jim Steins not run over the mark, who knows, you might have been in the grand final, but you probably wouldn't have been.
No, I wouldn't have been, and either would have Robbie Flower, because we were both in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. I'd broken my collarbone in about 3 or 4 places, and Robbie had done something similar. So we actually thought that Melbourne were going to win. It was done, and if we'd have played Carlton the next week, we thought we were a real chance, because we always had the wood on Carlton. But unfortunately, it didn't happen.
Yeah. What was the mood around the place when you get that close?
Look, it was something where I guess at the time, like in 87, we won. I think we had to win our last 8 or 9 games in a row. And so it was a momentum build. And we got to the stage. And when you look at it, everyone forgets, and this poor guy's going to cop it, but Jimmy running over the mark, sure. But 2 minutes before that, there's a guy called Simon Eisholt that was 1 metre out from the goal.
At the scoreboard end.
Yeah. And he kicked it like he did the biggest swish kick I've ever seen in my life, and missed. If that goal had got if, it would be a different scenario. But everyone, poor old Jimmy, remembers that. But that's the critical part. But it was unique, and I remember when we caught up probably 2 or 3 months afterwards in their pre-season, and we were determined that we had a group of guys that were very young. We had Gary Lyon that was a young kid, not a superstar yet. We had Todd Viney that was a tough, hard, great player. And then we had the likes of Dean Sharon he was a tagger. And they don't have those today, although they're coming back. And his job was as important, as Jimmy Steins in the ruck, and we were determined to play well. And then in 88, we had a really great bunch of guys that we used to go out together socially as well. So we were very close. And then we got into the 88, and we were exhausted the time we got there. I can remember on the Friday where you do the parade, and we were in the Flagstaff Gardens, just all sitting there waiting, and I felt like I was 100 years old and had 10 ton on me. And all the players later, you could see we were shot. And then when we came out, we were playing against this super team where, they proved later how good they were, but we were spent. Our time was done.
So in the back of your mind, even before you ran onto the MCG to the roar of the crowd on grand final day, the day that everybody wants to play, you knew you couldn't get it done?
No, I wouldn't say that, because then that's a self-doubt of your mind, which you can't have. If you're going to have that doubt, you shouldn't play. We were all thought, yes, we're a chance to win, but we just didn't have the energy, and energy is an amazing thing. Nervous energy, can sap the life out of a player if he gets it wrong. And that's pretty much what happened. We were gone out there and we were done. We were a group of many young guys. I was probably one of the experienced guy, but we were, these were kids, young kids that were trying their hardest. They'd worked so hard over 2 years, and they weren't a superstar group, but we're up against, one of the toughest superstar, greatest teams in that era by a long way.
If you lose any grand final, it will be soul destroying. But when you're out there and you're out there for probably an hour and maybe more, and you know you're going to get beaten, what sort of experience is that like, that you have to play out time, you have to get to the final siren anyway?
It was the hardest 3 quarters I've ever played.
Yeah.
Because after the first quarter, we were done. Yep. We were like, and it was the hardest thing to do. Do I make sure my guy doesn't get a kick? What do we do? How do we stop this? Do you drop into the back line? Do you go and belt somebody? To cause some kind of spark. These are the things that certainly went through my mind, and I know went through a lot of others. I guess that the young kids would have their hearts and their minds, they would have ducked once they dropped their head. You can imagine that the Hawthorn guys would be on top of them, and once you go down to that level, it's very, very hard to come back. It was difficult, and it started raining, and it was worse. We actually tell a bit of a joke. One of my mates, Jamie Dersma, who was a business partner with me for 15 years, when we actually go out socially, I can remember just before is that we had the biggest losing record for Melbourne until I think Port Adelaide, and yes, they beat us by 3 points. That was one of the greatest days Jamie and I have ever had watching a grand final, because we were cheering that Port would be 3 points down on us, and it did happen. But what we used to do is I'd go out and I'd turn to we'd be out with some friends or some guys we'd met, and they'd say, "Oh, how did you go in the grand final, Jamie?" And he goes, "Oh, I had 12 goals kicked on me," which the poor bugger did, because he was the only tall guy, and they kept moving him onto Dunstall and all the other. And then the guys would say to me, "So how did you go?" And I said, "Well, I couldn't get a kick, so I went on Jamie and kicked 3 as well." So, so we use that as a bit of fun, but you have to, you've got to have a bit of fun now that it's so far away.
Yeah, if you don't laugh, you'd cry.
Well, we did a lot of that too.
Yeah, and you probably would, because of the devastating nature of the defeat. I've spoken to a lot of guests on the program, Brian, who talk about the scars that a losing grand final inflicted on them. Did you carry those scars for a long time?
I'd have to say no. To me, football was a means to a beginning, not a means to an end.
And that makes you a very different animal to a lot of football. Completely
different, and I am, and I always was. And that's why people didn't understand. They would think, Brian Wilson, he's early days, I was, wouldn't know me in regards to I'd be in there trying to get the ball to prove myself. And then later I would try and do the best for the team or kick the winning goal and all that type of stuff. And people would perceive me as, as a show pony. But I loved living on the edge. So I loved either I performed and I did really well, or if I didn't perform and I got a kick in the butt, or the press would have a go at me, then rightly so. So that was my determination and what needed me to get going. Where football now is a completely different game. You're trained and you're mentally taught in many, many different facets. You don't come in with either a chip on your shoulder. It doesn't exist anymore. You don't come in coming from a poor family where you're fighting and fighting to earn money to live. That doesn't exist. So the game for these young guys now is very different, and thankfully so.
Just with regards to that 88 loss, you said that you didn't carry the scars too much. Do you think the football club as a whole carried the scars, though? When you get that close, you're robbed of it in circumstances in 87, you're belted up in 88. Did that affect the football club going forward? Well,
it didn't, because later on, Gary Lyon and the boys played in another grand final. I think that was the one. That was at 91. I think it was 91. I can't remember now. That one there, the one that they played in, it might have even been later than that. No, it would have been later than that. That was the one I was devastated.
Are we talking about 2000?
Well, it is 2000. God, so long ago.
Yeah.
The 2000 one. I thought, that was probably the one that really, really, put Melbourne back a long, long way. When we played, we were a really good bunch of guys that weren't super, super talented, but we were all together and hard. That can only be sustained for 2 years, which it did, 2-3 years. Then in 2000, you had some superstar young guys all together, and I thought when we got whacked out of it then, that was the one. And then, like last year, look what happened last year, preliminary. It was another belting.
Yeah.
And I
was
guess,
that one of the biggest cases of stage fright you've seen? I was actually there and calling the game that day, and it just looked that way to me.
Yeah, it did. The guys were all deers with headlights coming, and that's just what it was, And I think that's gone into this season as well. That's why the Demons unfortunately haven't been, as well as everyone thought. And that's about, there's a word called culture, okay? And culture is what you have to create. Collingwood Football Club, they've had culture for 100 years, but they've now got a great culture because the coach they wanted to sack. The club said no, and the players rallied around Buckley, and he's now blossoming to the great coach that he was always going to be. And that's culture. Hawthorn has a culture. And they've had a culture since the late 70s, and that culture will never change. Melbourne, they haven't had a culture. We haven't had a culture. And do we need to be tough? I don't know. But we need to create our own culture. Now, what that is, I don't know. I don't know what that is, but we've got to get to a stage where we can build on something year after year after year. It doesn't matter who comes in. It's a method and a culture. And Geelong, look at Geelong now. That's what they've been building. He's got a 71%, I think, win rate.
Yeah.
That's unheard of.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Because where did he come from? He came from a Lee Matthews culture, which is a Hawthorn inbred culture, from a triple premiership, and he's brought that into Geelong, and he's still there, and he's still able to create this amazing culture. And the administrators are incredibly, they've been there a long time, so they know that's a culture. Does Melbourne have a culture? No. 3 years ago, we had to get the AFL to come in to help us. When I was there, we had a vote as to whether we were going to join with and amalgamate with Hawthorn Footy Club.
Yeah, the Velcro Hawk, the famous Velcro Hawk, and Don Scott.
And the Don Scott said no, So that's what I think is missing. And if a young guy comes in and a senior player will come up to him and say to him, okay, this is how we play as a Melbourne team. This is what we do, and this is how you do it, and this is what you've got to get to and attain to this level. Otherwise, you're not going to be a place in the side. That's what I don't know that's at Melbourne. I mean, I'm only a spectator. I don't go down there. But the guys are an incredibly talented bunch of guys. And I think that the talent's there. And I think that this year, the injuries have certainly occurred. But some of the superstars that we're going to be, and they've been written up, they've had a tough year. And you know what? I think it's going to be good for them because they'll fight or flight. That's what they'll do. They'll learn as young guys. This was a tough season. The second half is really important, and they've got to play as a team. They've got to play as one, forget about the score, but get their systems and methods right. And, 2020, who knows?
We're talking about one football club that hasn't won a flag since 1964. We're just about out of time. When we come back on the other side of the break, we'll talk about another club that hasn't won a flag since 1966, the Saints. And you went there. And there might be a bit of a story in how you got there. We'll find out from Brian Wilson when we come back on the other side of the break. Our final segment on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Welcome back to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
Just about out of time with the Brownlow medalist Brian Wilson. So much more we could catch up on. But, Brian, I wanted to talk about the transition. So you've had 3 clubs. You've been at Footscray, North Melbourne, the successful time at Melbourne from an individual sense, if not a team sense, not all the way anyway. How did you find yourself at the Saints?
Well, that was interesting. It was the last game in 1990 out at Waverley. I pulled my hamstring just before we were to go into the finals. So I retired. That was it. I'd finished. I'd had enough. My passion wasn't there. The desire wasn't really there. So I decided that that's it. Retirement's ready to go, ready to look at in the business sector. And from October, so September through to October, I kept getting a phone call from St Kilda, from Kenny Sheldon, who was the coach, and Peter Hudson, who was the football manager, and they kept ringing me, Willow, we'd love you to come to St Kilda. We want you to teach the kids. And we will want you in the pocket next to Plugger. You'll kick an easy couple of goals a game. You'll be there for 4 or 5 years, but we want you to experience. And I said, look, guys, that would be lovely, but no, thank you, I'm not there. So they rang me every week for 8 weeks. And it was late November, and I was at home, and it was a Friday night. Now, back then, they didn't have mobile phones, so you had the phone in the house. And the phone used to ring at about 5:30, 6 o'clock every Friday. And I was with my mate, a great mate of mine, a guy called Marty Kemp, and we're having a few drinks, and we're about to go out, and the phone rang. And I said, okay, watch this. He goes, what is it? I said, mate, have a listen to this. So I picked the phone up, and I had it so that he could hear. And there was someone from St Kilda Football Club. And I said to them, look, unless you can have $30,000 in a brown paper bag at my house tomorrow, please leave me alone. And we hung up and we started laughing, and that was hilarious. And we went out. So the next morning, Marty stayed at my house in Essendon, and the next morning he knocks on my bedroom door. He goes, there's someone at the door. I said, well, answer. He goes, no, they want to see you. And I think, oh, goodness, what's happened? So I go to the door, and then there's a guy standing there, and he looks me up and down. He goes, yep, you're Brian Wilson. And he gave me a brown paper bag. And I went, what's this? He goes, no, do I sign anything? No, you're right. So I went out, grabbed it, and we went into the kitchen, and I opened this bag, and there was $30,000 cash. And I turned to my mate, Marty, I said, oh, my goodness, what are we going to do? He said, we're going to go out and spend the money, and you're playing for St Kilda. And away we went. And the first thing I had to do was get to know Plugger, who was a hard guy to get to know. So I said to the club, well, practice matches and all that, I want a room with the big fella. So we get to know. And we would when we do run-throughs, I would always be with Plugger and I would be together. And we struck up a fantastic relationship. He's just a lovely, lovely man. So cut a long story short, we played a few games, and then we played Melbourne at the MCG. So
what was that experience like?
Oh, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So I can remember walking in the change room, which is the old Richmond change rooms, all dressed in yellow and black, and I was really, really keen to do well. So I've gone up, and Kenny Sheldon's come over to me, and he said, Willow, we're going to start you on the bench. Now, back in my day, when you played on the bench or started on the bench, that was the worst insult you could do. It just was. You never it just didn't work. And I said to Bomber, mate, you can't do that to me. I said, I'm at the MCG. I've got all these people in Melbourne. Please don't. He said, no. We're worried that you're going to upset the team balance with what you could do, because he could see I was pretty psyched. So I grabbed my bag. I was within turning around and walking out, but I said, I can't do that because I don't want to upset St Kilda Footy Club. So I got dressed, and then what happened is I went to the interchange bench, which was the MCC members. That's where the bench was. Mm-hmm. And you could imagine, as I sat down and the game started, the members went absolutely feral.
They had some advice for you?
Oh, they had lots of advice.
Yeah. Was any of it anatomically possible?
No. And I can remember. So I'm waiting. I'm sitting there. It's like 2 minutes, 5 minutes. And then the phone rang. And Bomber goes, go and do your thing. And I went full forward. I kicked 7. And then I remember the very, very last, within 2 minutes to go, it's a dream come true. The ball's come down. I mark it. I go back. I kick the winning goal. And then I ran to the members reserve, and I put my fingers up, both hands, as in the 2-finger salute, and they've gone absolutely deathly silence.
We feel very grateful to have been able to reminisce with you over the last hour or so on a brilliant career. As far as football is concerned, it seems as though you're continuing that in the business world. Brian, it's been great to sit down and have a chat to you. Nice to catch up.
And good to see you, Pete.
Good on you, mate.
Let's not make it another 30 years.
Let's not. Brian Wilson, the Brownlow medalist, joining us. Hope you enjoyed that edition of This Is Your Sporting Life.